Welcome back, travelers, to the Planeswalker's Tome, your portal to the realms of Magic the Gathering. Whether you're joining us on YouTube or through our podcast, we're thrilled to have you along for the journey. Before we delve into today's chapter, a quick legal note. While we're diving into the rich world crafted by Wizards of the Coast, it's important to remember this is an unofficial audiobook, produced with love and respect for the original content. Rest assured, our endeavor is fully compliant with the 2017 Wizards of the Coast fan content policy. Now let's resume our exploration of the Eternal Ice by Jeff Grubb. Chapter 9. Hearts and Minds. The fact that Kejildor was known as the Ice Civilization does not mean it was the only civilization on Tezier. Isolated outposts of dwarves battled against the waxing and waning hordes of orcs and goblins. The elves survived in Findhorn and Yavimaya, and the merfolk still teemed in their underwater mansions. Yet, all these races suffer from the problems of not being human, and as such are passed over and ignored in human histories. Even the declaration that Kejildor was the sole great human civilization of Tezier is erroneous. The ice forced entire nations into the transient lifestyle of nomads, and they changed to meet their new world. Of these nomadic nations, the best known is the Balduvians from the north of the Calplusian Mountains, and they are known primarily for their long-running battles with the Kejildorians. Arkle, Argivian scholar. Jodah had been running for so long that he could not remember where it all started. For that matter, he could not remember anything for sure at all. Old thoughts, old memories, old regrets, all seemed to be pulled from him as soon as they came to his mind, spinning away from his conscious mind and acting as fodder to strengthen the things that followed him. The things that dogged his steps were maddening creations, in part because they were unseen. They slouched like half-formed beasts through the myriad hallways after him. He tried to face them directly, but his eyes kept sliding off them, as if they were made of something that repelled light itself. Sometimes they seemed to flicker and fade. At other times there were looming grayish shadows that filled the halls behind him. They called to him in languages that might have been human once, but now were reduced to meaningless garbles and cries. He could not understand the words, but his chest grew tight and his heart thundered in response. He cried at the sound of the unknown voices, and tears streamed down his face as they fled from them. The halls seemed to betray him as well, both familiar and alien, both secure and tenuous. He remembered some of the places, such as the old manor house where he grew up. Twice now he found himself in its great hall, with its aged black and white tile, only to turn a corner or enter another room and discover he was in some other place, far from where he knew he should be. At the bottom of his soul, he knew the order of these rooms, the map from one to the next, but some malefic deity had scrambled them, mixed them into a funhouse maze they could not escape. The rooms changed from plastered wood to well-lit stone, and rough caverns, and even ice tunnels. There were libraries of all descriptions, including the one in Limdul's vault. There were laboratories filled with luminescent fluids that spiraled through twisted glassware and frosted ambuletics. There were bedrooms and studies and personal rooms, nagging in their familiarity and frustrating in their strangeness. Occasionally there were mirrors. Most reflected back the frightened, exhausted old man who passed by them. But others showed a young man, a thin man with a thin beard. Some only reflected back monstrous grey shadows. He fled from those rooms, shouting. As he fled, he felt his mind begin to go, joining the regrets and memories and tears that he left behind. He was sure of it now. He could only remember flight, but not where he had fled from. He would find himself in some room or location, then his pursuers would catch up with him, and he would run again, mindless and mad, until exhausted, he'd find himself in a new place. He was in a great room, filled with the rank upon rank of seats. He knew in that fleeting moment that that room would soon fill with scholars, who would all come to listen to what he had to say. Then the shadows began to creep through the room, and he ran. He was at the base of a great glacier, a huge curtain wall of ice that towered over him, and he remembered feeling very satisfied that he had put it there to protect his students from the dangerous world beyond it. Then shadows moved within those icy walls, and cracked through their thin veneer, and he took to his heels. He was in one of the rooms of his school, comfortable but unfamiliar. Candles were ringed around the body laid out on a bier. He knew he feared to see the body, and feared more that he would not recognize it. Behind him, something in the shadows hissed like a snake's scales on the unsanded wood, and he fled. Each time the period of flight seemed longer, the blackness in his mind larger, the important parts buried deeper. Now he was clutching at what memories he had, confused though they be. Leshrac, Limdul, the Keeper, Yaya, but they fractured around him like broken glass, and he kept running. In the distance, he heard a bell. It had brought him up short. He could only hear the wheezing of his own lungs and the towering of his own heart. The cries of those who had chased him were lost. But this was some new torment in his personal hell. But the bell chimed again, winding sweetly through the long passages and haunted rooms. It called to him. Jodah began to run, this time not away from his pursuers, but towards the sound of the bell. At intersections he would pause, waiting for it to sound again. Then he would hurry down that new direction. The bell sounded like copper. It carried a heavier tone than that made of delicate silver, and it's not as deep and plodding as iron. As Jodah realized this, that he could identify the bell's composition only by its sound, he hurried forward, delighted by his discovery. The shadows, when glimpsed from the corner of his eyes, did not disturb him, and he no longer had time for them. Instead, they followed him, relentlessly like a tide coming in over the sand. Finally, the sound led him to a great archway, opening out into an empty city. Jodah paused, unsure of himself. Yet the bell sounded from somewhere out in the city. The sky was overcast, and the thin fog lay on the ground, hiding the cobbles. The bell sounded, and Jodah carefully moved among the buildings. The structures seemed unoccupied, as if their tenants had deserted them only moments before. Indeed, as with many things, they seemed familiar. Cross streets curved away at every intersection, and Jodah realized that the city was laid out in a great circle, and he was heading for its heart. The bell sounded, and he reached the center of the city, a great plaza dominated by a huge fountain. The fountain had a wide stone rim for a centerpiece, and a huge plinth that had been erected with the face of lions on the cardinal points. Jodah thought that there should be pigeons present, and there was the sound of flapping wings overhead. Despite himself, Jodah looked up, but there was only fog above. The bell lessened for a stroke, faltered, and then stopped. It was no longer needed. He was where he had to be. Jodah walked towards the fountain and looked around. Roads launched out in all directions from the central plaza, and on those roads were shadowy things, the things that had pursued him all this time. They held back now, waiting for something, waiting for him. Jodah looked over the edge of the fountain, expecting it to be filled with plants and dirt and dead things, but the water was clear and wavered only slightly. At the bottom of the fountain something glimmered. Jodah paused for a moment, looking at the glimmering thing. Then he sat at the edge of the fountain and reached into the water. It was cool but not cold, and felt as thick as mercury as he snagged the glimmering object and pulled it to the surface. It was a mirror, about the size of his hand, shiny on both sides. It felt heavy, solid, and real. Jodah turned it over in his hands and looked into it. It reflected his face, the face that was older than he remembered it being, but younger than it had any right to be. It reflected his face, and the face that was older than he remembered it, but younger than it had any right being. There was a flicker in the mirror. Another face seemed to loom over the reflection. Jodah's shoulder. Immediately he flinched and looked over his own shoulder, but there was nothing there. He was alone at the fountain in the central plaza, the shadows waiting for him at all the exits. He looked into the mirror and saw the secondary face was his own as well. Seemingly a trick of the mirror, a flaw that caused it to reflect double. But the flawed reflection looked better, more sure of itself, wiser, more knowledgeable, more confident, more understanding. As he watched, the second face slowly moved across the mirror's surface, superimposing itself over his own face. As the second face overlaid the first, Jodah felt something cool and relaxing settle on his mind. It seemed to pass through his skull and into his body. It was invigorating, it was reassuring, and it was very, very familiar. It was himself. He had locked away part of himself in that mirror, to be retrieved when he needed it. He needed it now, and he felt his life and his sanity return to him. His life, all 2,500 plus years of it. It all came to him, not in a sudden flood, as it had before, but in a slow percolation of water melting from a snowfield. Slowly, Jodah remembered who he was. He had been a boy in the Dark Ages, in a time as the glacier gathered. He had learned the basic skills of magic while fleeing the intolerant church, a faith now long dead. He had honed those skills beneath the watchful eye of a false mentor, who sought him only as a tool for his own ends. In the end, he had bested that false ally. Merciful, he remembered the name, and delighted at its bitter taste. He went on to learn more, in a community of magicians, known then as the City of Shadows. Then he led those mages as the generations came and went, eventually becoming known as the Archmage Eternal, the undying wizard of the School of the Unseen. Jodah smiled to himself. The City of Shadows had once been the College of Latnam, and now was the College of the Unseen. Everything changes. Everything remains the same. Mountains are ground down by the glaciers and become plains. Swamps dry out from the treated seas and become pine stands. The oceans ebb, and more saltwater marshes appear. Yet, it all remains part of the landscape. Alteration and equilibrium. It was the secret of magic, which Jodah now remembered all too well. Change the infested land with its magic, its mana, which he knew how to conjure, how to shape, as he saw fit. Having lived through the changes of the land, his power was great, though without his memory, without his knowledge, it was wasted. Jodah had changed, and not changed at all with the passing years. His flesh aged only slowly, such that he would gain gray hair or wrinkle in the entire lifetime of another mortal. It had started here, in the real version of the fountain that now occupied his mind. Oh yes, all this was within his mind. He knew that as well. He had inadvertently bathed in the fountain, and it slowed his age, though it did not stop it. To all but the truly immortal planeswalker, Jodah seemed unaging and undying, and yet he did change as the years wore away at him. Brilliant ideas of one generation become the worst problems of the next. Legacies that had been valued beyond life would rot and turn to dust from neglect. The same mistakes would be made by different people, and Jodah could see it happening again and again, regardless of his own actions. The repetition ground him down, like a mountain eroded by a river of ice. The mountain was still there, but broken down, shattered by the relentless millstone of the glacier. Finally, the mountain would break entirely. The first time, Jodah almost went mad, struck by the grief of those who had died, struck by the remorse of the words spoken and never spoken, feelings shared or never shared, struck by regret for roads not taken. It was not the accumulated knowledge that was breaking him, but the accumulated emotion from several lifetimes of living. In the end, Jodah, the archmage, not archmage eternal yet, had to transform himself or go mad. So he transformed himself, or rather, found a way for him to start over again. He could place all his knowledge within a device, within the mirror, then wipe that knowledge from his own mind. Then, meditating on the mirror, he could regain what was lost, but without the emotional attachments. He could still feel the pain of losing a wife in his past, but it was distant, muffled, like thunder in the distance, which did not threaten him immediately. This last time, something went wrong. No, a lot of things went wrong. He remembered up to the ritual that allowed him to cast his memories into the mirror, and the beginning of the spell to purge his own mind. After that, it was all bits and pieces. Limdul, Yaya, and Freyalise. He paused for a moment and decided, yes, Freyalise had been there, and that was never a good sign. Jodah looked up from the mirror and saw he was in a fog-bound city, the unnamed one where he had first found the fountain. He was in a memory, and if he thought hard enough, he'd remember the fear he felt at the time, at the pit of his stomach, the panic he felt when the goblins almost found him, hiding in the brackish water of the fountain. Jodah looked up and saw the shadows that lined the edges of the plaza now. They had form and solidarity. He could look at them without flinching. Light no longer slid off them, and they no longer flickered or loomed. They were his memories, his feelings, his regrets. But now, armed with the knowledge stowed within the mirror, he could face them. They were a jumble. Indeed, he sensed that his entire mental house was a jumble, that he needed some straightening and tidying. Now the ghosts of his past stood side by side, without any sense of order. Here was Jonte, the practical joker from his 3rd century, and Elena, his last wife, who had called into being the great silver statues of the glass-covered Adakar wastes. Here was Shannon, the rotund scatterbrained mage who discovered Drafna's original notes, and Vaska, his original teacher, and Seema, his first wife, dark-haired and petite. She would stomp her foot whenever Jodah was being pig-headed, which was often. He could remember now. He looked at her and remembered the first time he met her, in the streets of Ged. He remembered the last time he saw her, as he wept at her deathbed, surrounded by friends and candles. Her death had brought about his first madness, and its solution. Now he could remember her, at least, and remembering her, keep the madness at bay. Seema opened her mouth and said, "I think he's going to be all right." She spoke in a voice that was not Seema at all, but rather with an Eastern accent. Jonte, the Bane in his 3rd century, spoke with a strange woman's voice. At least he stopped screaming. I'll call that a good sign. Seema tilted her head slightly, and Jodah saw she was slightly sad that this reunion would end soon. "Jodah," she said. Her J softened almost to a Y. "Are you with us?" Jodah nodded. Yes. He'd been in the vaults of his memory for too long now. He had to return to make new memories, to keep the cycle of change going. That's what made magic happen, and he had to be part of it. Seema arched her eyebrows. "Come on, old man. Jodah, are you with us? In a barbarian tent, Jodah's eyes flickered open. Yaya's face hovered just inches off his nose. Beyond her, a massively muscular blonde woman stood, her arms folded over her chest. Of course I'm with you, Yaya Ballard, said Jodah smoothly. Where else would I be? The interior of the tent was large but cozy, and Jodah immediately knew that it was the dwelling of an important person, a chief or a shaman of the Balduvian people. A lattice of bound wood crisscrossed the roof above him, supporting a thick double blanket of hides. It was warm and secure, only in the way that such things were when they are created by those who depended on them for life or death. Jodah slowly sat up, and Yaya backed away. The large woman did not move from her own position on a rough carved wood stool by the fireplace. Are you with us? Asked Yaya again. I am with you, said Jodah. Can I have a new question, please? Yaya rocked away a little surprised. Then she said, Are you all right? Help me to my feet, said Jodah, leaning on Yaya as he rose from his rudely lashed cot. He stretched, then winced, and rubbed his shoulder where the keeper of Trestlehorn had dislocated it. It was only slightly sore. How long have I been out? 10 days, said Yaya. And the last 7 of them have been spent here, said the blonde woman, screaming on that bunk. Another day, and my shamans would have taken matters into their own hands, I tell you. They were arguing whether you were a gift or a curse from the elemental gods. Jodah looked at the massive woman and said, I thank you for your hospitality, chieftain. The large woman rose. Lavisa Coldeye, she said, chief of my tribe, and the youngest of my family ever to slay the pale bear and gain her true name. Jodah half looked at Yaya. This is important, I assume. The blonde chieftain regarded Jodah stonily. I am the leader of my people. They are a strong people, and I am stronger. The taskmage told me when you were the leader of yours as well, and a prisoner of the necromancer. We kept you safe when Ballard was stealing your magic back from the lowlanders. Jodah nodded. I appreciate your hospitality. Lavisa Coldeye snorted, and it was a powerful snort. You are just another lowlander. We kept you because the taskmage helped me years ago. A lowlander hawk rider brought her back. The hawk rider probably owed her as well, so we did not open fire on it. Jodah looked at Yaya. The taskmage just shrugged. What can I say? I play well with others. Now that you are no longer screaming, said the barbarian chieftain, the question is, what are we going to do with you? Yaya added, Jodah, what do you remember? Jodah blinked. Remember? Everything. I remember who I am, what I've been doing here, and... Ah, he said. Looked down at his feet. I see what you're asking. You want to know what I remember since the emotion ritual. I don't remember leaving the school, only waking up at Trestlehorn. That part's foggy, but I remember researching for the necromancer, and I... He paused for a moment, then his face hardened. I remembered his rings. Rings? Asked Yaya. What about them? I remember my work. The research I did for Limdul. It was important. Dangerously important. He's more powerful now than ever. I remember you, Yaya, escaping and reaching a safe haven, but nothing further. You're in a bad way, said Yaya. An addictive pollen. Din Bulb used it to keep you under the influence. He was killing you. I had to call in help. You mean these Balduvians? He nodded towards Cold Eyes. Yaya shrugged. A little heavier. I called for her aid. She let her voice drop. From the lady. From Freyalise. Jodah nodded as Yaya confirmed his own memory. You got Freyalise to help me? I'm surprised. She owed you, said Yaya. And now we owe her. Shed mentally. You do play well with others, said Jodah. Yaya opened her mouth to explain the full cost of Freyalise's help, but the Balduvian chieftain thumped at her heavy hand on the table. Humph! You bring in wizards and talk with goddesses, Ballard. I'm impressed. But the question remains. What are we going to do with you now? My shamans expect me to seek some favor in return for not sacrificing you to the elemental gods. Jodah touched his hands to his temples. Yes, he said. What can I do? There are a great deal of undead in the land now. More with every winter, said Lovisa. This winter is the worst. Every year more of my people fall to Limdul's forces. I want you to help kill the necromancer and help us destroy his undead army. You will come with us and destroy Trestlehorn. Jodah stood there for a moment, within the domed hut. Finally the archmage said simply, I cannot help. Yaya shouted despite herself, and Lavisa Cold Eye's face contorted to a tight thunderstorm of anger. Jodah! Don't tell them that, started Yaya. You are a lowlander, said Lavisa. You have no more sense of honor than a beast. Jodah raised a hand, and both women silenced. I cannot help you defeat Limdul alone. He is a planeswalker, Lashrak the Nightwalker, as his patron, and I cannot defeat that. Further, I know he has been increasing his forces from the casualties he inflicts. Over time, he grows stronger. Were I to accompany your people to besiege Tresselhorn, he could kill us all. And yes, he is more dangerous. Perhaps because of my own work. Yaya interrupted. You cannot just abandon them after they've helped you. Jodah raised his hand again for silence. I said I cannot defeat Limdul alone, nor with only our forces. We will have to get more help. From where? Asked the chieftain. From the mountain goblins? Perhaps there's an ancient dragon that owes the task mage a favor? From the Kejeldorians, said Jodah. The great chieftain rocked back with an explosion of laughter. The lowlanders? She mocked. They are like ice crabs. Within their hard-shelled cities they are soft. They have a number of trained military orders, said Jodah. They have better weapons, they have greater numbers, and a knowledge of the land. Together, you could match the necromancer's forces. Levisa Cold Eye snorted. They would never talk to us, she said. But they will talk to me, said Jodah calmly. And as you said, I owe you. Can I pay off my debt any better than offering allies? Jodah, said Yaya, I'm not sure that's the best idea. The Kejeldorians may not be your friends. She looked at Levista for a long moment, as if deciding if she should speak or not. Your assistant back at the school, Gerda Eil's daughter, was responsible for your abduction. Her cousin is the royal mage of Kejeldor, Gusta Ebel's daughter. Similar name, said Jodah thoughtfully. Always got them confused. Yaya chose her words carefully. Gerda apparently had you spirited away after a ritual, before you regained your memory. She asked Gustatha to keep your mirror, just in case. Humph, growled Levista. Typical lowlander thinking. Scatter everything to the four winds. When I recovered your device, I overheard the two of them talking, said Yaya. She, Gustatha, was pretty steamed at her cousin Gerda, that you were in the necromancer's clutches, but she was still willing to hold on to your mirror, and she didn't do anything when she heard you were on the loose again. Jodah laced his hands together, templed the first fingers, and tapped them against his lips as Yaya laid out the details of her raid on the royal mage's tower. When she finished, he simply said, Good. Good? Yaya Abba shut up. Good that Gustatha is bright enough not to trust Limdul, and that she's got enough guts to stand up to her cousin. She'll make an excellent friend in court. Jodah smiled slightly. Friend? Yaya sputtered. These women are responsible for your suffering in Tresselhorn. They would have left you to rot. Aren't you angry? Jodah's smile deepened. I'm furious, he chuckled. But now's not the time for revenge. Not with Limdul breathing down everybody's necks. And Gustatha's Ebel's daughter may win herself back into my good graces. As for Gerda, my faithless assistant, I already know the perfect punishment for someone who wants my job. Don't worry. When we die with the royal mage, I'll sup with a long spoon. But for the moment, I think we need her and the Kejeldorians as allies, not enemies. Levisa took in the archmage's logic, curling a finger beneath her chin. And what we do in the meantime, while you're getting these allies. Levisa took in the archmage's logic, curling a finger beneath her chin. And what do we do in the meantime, while you're out getting these allies? It's what you do not do that's important. Do not engage in battle with the necromancer, said Jodah. Skirmish, but only to protect your people. Be willing to sacrifice land to buy time. Never lead your dead on the field. Pull south towards the Kejeldorian lands. They will need your help if Limdul is as powerful as I fear he has become. Levisa nodded, and said, You speak truth, but it's a cold truth. You must come now to speak with the chiefs and shamans. If you can convince them, then they will gather others in a great gathering. A moot! Come. The huge chieftain hefted herself to her feet, and threw Jodah a heavy fur robe. As he slipped it on, Levista Cold Eyes was already out the door, and a chill wind slipped in beneath the whale-skin flap. Jodah made to follow her. Hey, said Yaya. Jodah turned at the doorway, and the small task mage came up to him. In case you don't remember, I just pulled your hide out of the fire, said Yaya, and busted you out of Tresselhorn, and found the mirror, and kept your marbles in. Of course, said Jodah, looking down at Yaya. Is there something in particular I can do in return? Some spell or device you desire? Yaya looked him in the eyes. After a few moments she frowned, and said, Nothing, I suppose. Jodah raised his eyebrows. The Yaya Ballard I know would want something for all her heroics, if only to keep up appearances. Well, she said, a small smile touching the corners of her mouth, you could teach me that blast spell you used to blow away Lestrak's minion. I blew away? Jodah's eyes closed for a moment, then he nodded. I just unsummoned him. Sent him back home. Same result, I suppose. You want to learn that? It might be useful, she said. And I think, at least, a thank you is in order for all I've done. Jodah's eyes softened for a moment, and he said, "Of course. Thank you, Yaya. I owe you my life." He kissed her softly on the forehead, and Yaya reached forward to hug the larger archmage. Her arms closed on empty air, and she looked up to see Jodah's retreating form passing out the door into the snowy evening. There were chiefs to meet, and shamans to convince. Yaya allowed herself a long, low curse, gathering her own fur robes around her, and followed him into the cold. Belinda Dana's daughter's Aether sat down on the battlements of Trestlehorn, and the Sky Knight dismounted. Undead guards lurched forward to take the reins, but the Aether was skittish in their presence. Belinda waved the black lacquered skeletons back and tied her mount up herself. Only after reassuring the great hawk and combing its feathers did the Sky Knight toss down the heavy satchel, which indeed contained all of her worldly belongings, at one of the skeleton guards, and allowed the other undead to escort her mount into the keep below. As they descended into the tower, Belinda felt discomforted by the undead presence. The black lacquered skeletons had no personality, and were nothing more than tools to be used at the necromancer's whim. Still, one could not pick one's allies, and dealing with the necromancer might prove to be the best method of restoring Keldor's honor and power. 2 figures were waiting for her in the reception hall, one seated on his throne of bone, the other standing to one side. Belinda bowed slightly to Limdul, and dropped fully to one knee before the figure of Marton Stromgald. "My Lord Stromgald," said Belinda, with another nod to the necromancer. "Lord Limdul." The necromancer gave a weary nod. Belinda noticed that the necromancer now had horns, long ornate ones like a ram's. He did not comment on them, so neither did she. "You have come," said Stromgald, looking ancient and tired. "With news," said Belinda. "The leaders of the military order stand with us." "All the orders?" questioned the figure on the throne. Belinda took a step back and shot a look at Marton. The grim, grey-faced leader gave her a nod, and the young woman addressed the necromancer directly. "Enough of them. The important ones. The ones that remember the name Marton Stormgald most strongly. The ones that remember the glories of our past. If you go far enough into anyone's past, you will find glory somewhere," said the necromancer, looking at the young Sky Knight between heavy brows. "Even me." Belinda nodded nervously to the necromancer, and turned to Stromgard. "We are prepared to move at once. The king is weak, the merchants can be cowed, and the magicians—" She thought of Yaya's escape from Krav, and wondered briefly what exactly she had helped spirit away from the royal mage. "The magicians are divided, and in disrepute." Marton Stromgard nodded stiffly, and Belinda continued, "Return with me, my lord. With a legendary figure of your reputation and power, there's no doubt the people will rally behind us. We will return Keldor to its true masters, to the people who love it best." "To Keldor," spat the necromancer. Belinda shot the ram-headed mage a fiery look, but Limdul was already turning towards a side table. 3 wide-rimmed glasses. The necromancer poured a pale blue brandy into each of them, offering the glasses to Marton and the Sky Knight. He took his own glass and raised it. "Drink to Keldor's true master," cried Limdul. "Tell her, friend Marton." "Drink," said Marton simply, and downed his glass. Limdul took a healthy swig. Belinda raised the glass to her lips and tilted her head back. The brandy felt like fire, sliding down her throat. It felt warm, like victory. She smiled. Marton simply nodded. Limdul managed a closed-mouthed grin, and then he spat his drink back into the glass. At once, Belinda knew what had happened, and she dropped her glass, going for the blade at her side. The glass seemed to fall slowly, and she moved slower still. Limdul laughed, and the laughter seemed to crawl along her bones like a shock of lightning. Her eyes were already failing as she grasped her sword. The fingers that closed around the hilt were stiff, dead things. She tried to curse, but her tongue had turned to dust. Gagging, she dropped to her knees, clutching her throat as a fire burned out from her belly and raced to her mind. The last thing she heard, far in the distance, was the sound of her great Aether screaming as the undead guards took their rusted blades to it. She pitched forward at Limdul's feet, and was still for a moment. "You killed her," said Marton. "A statement, not an accusation." "It was her or me," said Limdul dryly. "Another moment, and I would have gagged on her patriotism." "She's dead," said Marton. "No more dead than you," said Limdul, as he knelt down next to the body, the muscle of his neck rippling to keep the horns bedecked at head level. Softly he intoned dark, malicious words not originally formed by human lips. He sang the soft, alien song for a moment, then paused and rose. Belinda slowly picked herself up off the floor. The glow of life had left her, replaced with a stoic grey cast. Her eyes were dull and unresponsive. "We will give Keljador to its true master," said Limdul, "for the dead outnumber the living, and have a previous claim." He smiled at the thought. "You and your cabal have served me well, and will continue to do so." He waved a hand at the Sky Knight and the General, both grey-fleshed puppets at his command. "Rest now. I need you both later." They closed their eyes and became statues dressed in armor. He smiled and left the reception hall. Limdul hurried down the hallway towards the archive vaults. The undead he passed snapped to automatic attention as he passed, but he gave them no recognition in return. Just as the Sky Knight had to report to him and Stormguard, Limdul had to report to his masters. The air ahead of him cracked and thickened as he approached the vault. Leshrac was there, sitting cross-legged and floating upside down over the main tables. He was reading a voluminous tome which lay flat on his inverted lap. Close to Leshrac, even an inanimate object obeyed his personal sense of gravity. The Planeswalker was alone. The scholars had been unraveled, returned to their base magical stock without the archmage to lead them. Limdul stood in the doorway and knocked. "You've done well, my beast," said Leshrac in his multi-octave voice. "Your toy magician did much while he was here. Much that will be useful." "Thank you, my liege," said the necromancer, bowing as much as his ram-horned head would permit. "Yes," said the Planeswalker, turning a page, not looking up. "When this rogue plane rockets towards our shard, we must be ready to strike. How are your forces?" "More by the day," said Limdul. "They filter in through Keljador now, turning small farms into more of our minions. By spring, we should be at the gates of Krav, and Kajeld itself. The only armies in this quadrant of Tessier will be unliving, and then we will move on to the rest of the continent." Leshrac nodded absent-mindedly. "Very good, Fleshworm, for this is the winter that will never know spring. The cold has done its job, and with subtle nudging, the world will never recover. The mortal flesh will freeze in any event, but it will be so much better to raise them when they are still warm, eh?" "As you say, my liege," said Limdul. "It is always as I say, isn't it?" said Leshrac. Raising a hand, Limdul began to back out of the room. "Oh, one more thing." "My liege?" "I know about your other research," said Leshrac calmly, turning a page. "About your desire to kill me." "My liege?" said Limdul, nervously sputtering. "I would never think to do anything to endanger you." "Tut!" said the Planeswalker, raising a bony, inhumanly long finger. "You bridled my orders, my demands, and my whims. I respect that in a flunky. You think me so alien that I can't understand rage, futility, and resentment? I am made of these things. You show initiative with your plans, and initiative is a good thing." He purred the last sentence, and Limdul felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. "Surely my liege knows I have no idea," started Limdul again. Leshrac leisurely turned another page. "I can read what is here in a summarized text, as well as what has been carefully excised. Your toy magician was very effective indeed. He almost puzzled out what you needed to know. Pity they escaped before you could find out the final secret." "My liege?" "Tut, Fleshward," said Leshrac. "I said I was impressed. Bask in my appreciation while you have it." I shall, my liege," said Limdul, bowing uneasily and briefly with his ornate head. Leshrac's head snapped up, a puzzled look on his long face. "You know, though, you don't bow sufficiently, Fleshworm." "Ah, I see the problem. You've not adjusted to your new headgear. Here, let me repair the oversight." The Planeswalker motioned, and Limdul screamed as his body twisted beneath Leshrac's magical energies. His shoulders broadened, his neck thickened, and his lower jaw became heavy, all to support the horns growing from his forehead. As Limdul screamed, Leshrac laughed like a chorus of goblins. "Much better," said Leshrac, when the screaming finally stopped. "Now try it again." Limdul pulled himself to his feet and bowed deeply to his master, his powerful shoulders still straining painfully under weight of his massive horns. "Better indeed," said Leshrac. "Keep me informed as to your progress in Keljador, particularly how strong your army has become. We will need every body we can get." Limdul bowed again, more smoothly this time. "We will need every body," he agreed, "if we are to take control of the north, and eventually all of Tessier." Leshrac held up a hand to dismiss his underling, and Limdul bowed one last time, leaving Leshrac in his meditative posture. Long after the necromancer had left, Leshrac allowed himself a chuckle. "That always was your problem, Fleshworm," he hissed. "You would settle for a mere continent. You think too small. Too small indeed." This concludes Chapter 9 of our saga. If you enjoyed the tale so far, don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on both YouTube and your preferred podcast platform. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, may your adventures be as boundless as the plains themselves. Thank you for listening.